The weight of my father's casket seemed to match the heaviness in my chest as I watched the pallbearers guide it down the center aisle. The funeral home smelled of lilies and formaldehyde, a sickening combination that would forever be linked to this day in my memory. I sat in the front row, my black dress pressed and proper, just as Dad would have wanted. My eyes burned from crying through the night, but I'd promised myself I would maintain composure during the service. Dad deserved that much. And Sarah. A hand touched my shoulder. My Aunt Vivian, Dad's sister, slid into the seat beside me. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" I nodded stiffly, unable to form words. The truth was, I wasn't holding up at all. After 18 months of watching cancer slowly consume my father, the strongest man I'd ever known, I felt hollow, a shell walking through motions that seemed pointless now that he was gone. The church filled quickly. Dad had been well respected in our small town, a veterinarian who often treated animals for free when their owners couldn't afford care. I scanned the crowd, noting the faces of neighbors, colleagues, and friends who had come to pay their respects. And then, slipping in through the side door, 20 minutes late, was Michael. My brother adjusted his tie as he sauntered down the side aisle, nodding to acquaintances as if arriving at a networking event rather than our father's funeral. He hadn't visited Dad once during the final 3 months. Not once. While I had sat beside Dad's hospital bed, watching his body wither and his mind remain stubbornly, painfully sharp until the very end, Michael had been too busy with work to make the 2-hour drive from the city. When Dad asked about him, I made excuses. "He's tied up with that big project, or he's planning to come next weekend." I lied for Michael because I couldn't bear to see the hurt in Dad's eyes when he realized his only son couldn't be bothered to say goodbye. Michael slid into the pew beside me without a word. He smelled of expensive cologne and coffee. No trace of tears on his face. No redness around his eyes. "You're late," I whispered. "Traffic," he replied, not bothering to look at me. The pastor began speaking, his deep voice echoing through the church as he described a man he had barely known. I tuned out the generic platitudes about my father, moving on to a better place and no longer suffering. Dad wouldn't have appreciated such sentimentality. He had faced death with the same practical approach he'd applied to life, head on, no sugarcoating. When the pastor invited me to deliver the eulogy, my legs felt leaden as I approached the podium. I unfolded the paper containing the words I'd carefully written at 3 a.m., determined to capture the essence of my father, his dedication to his patients, his quiet generosity, his terrible jokes that somehow always made me laugh. "My father taught me that strength isn't about never falling," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's about how you get back up when you do." That's when I heard it, a short, stifled sound from the front row. I glanced up from my notes. Michael had his hand partially covering his mouth, but his shoulders were shaking slightly. At first I thought he was finally breaking down, overcome by grief. Then I saw his eyes. There was no sadness there, no grief, just the gleam of something that looked disturbingly like amusement. He was laughing. My words faltered. The paper trembled in my hands as a memory surfaced. Michael and me as children, building sandcastles on the beach while Dad took photos. Michael had always been Dad's favorite back then. "My boy's going to take over the practice someday," Dad would say proudly, tussling Michael's hair. But Michael had chosen finance instead, moving to the city, distancing himself. Their relationship had fractured years ago when Dad refused to fund Michael's investment scheme. "It's too risky," Dad had said. "I've worked too hard for this money to gamble it away." Michael had stormed out, and their relationship had never fully recovered. As I continued reading my eulogy, my mind raced. 2 weeks before Dad died, he'd asked me to bring him some papers from his home office. While searching for them, I'd discovered a draft of a new will, dated just 3 months earlier. I hadn't read it, it felt like an invasion of privacy, but I remembered seeing Michael's name prominently on the first page. Now, watching my brother's barely concealed smirk as we laid our father to rest, a sick feeling washed over me. Dad's estate wasn't enormous, but it included the house, his veterinary practice, and the investments he'd carefully built over decades. Had Michael finally gotten what he wanted? I finished the eulogy on autopilot, hardly aware of what I was saying. When I returned to my seat, Michael was composed again, his face a mask of appropriate solemnity. But I had seen something I couldn't unsee, a glimpse behind a facade that I'd been too loyal to question until now. That was beautiful, sis, he whispered, patting my hand condescendingly. Dad would have been proud. I pulled my hand away, feeling something harden inside me. The brother I had once adored suddenly felt like a stranger sitting beside me, a stranger who had laughed at our father's funeral. The reception following the funeral was a blur of sympathetic faces and half-eaten finger foods. I stood by the mantel in Dad's living room, my living room now, I supposed, at least partially, mechanically accepting condolences while Michael worked the room like a politician, charming Dad's old friends with stories I'd never heard before. He was always there for me, Michael was saying to Dad's fishing buddy, Frank, even when I was struggling to get my business off the ground. I nearly choked on my water. Dad had explicitly refused to invest in Michael's business ventures, calling them glorified pyramid schemes. The revision of history happening before my eyes made my stomach turn. As I contemplated slipping away to the sanctuary of Dad's study, a woman in blue scrubs approached. Her face was familiar, one of the hospice nurses who had cared for Dad in his final weeks. Sarah? Her voice was gentle. I'm Elaine, I don't know if you remember me. Of course I do, you were so kind to him. I managed a small smile, remembering how she'd snuck in Dad's favorite black licorice, despite the doctor's restrictions. Elaine glanced around nervously before pulling an envelope from her purse. Your father asked me to give you this after everything was done. He was very specific, only to you, and only after the funeral. The envelope was heavy, sealed with Dad's distinctive wax stamp, the one he'd used on important documents, a practice I'd always found endearingly old-fashioned. He said you'd know what to do, Elaine added, squeezing my arm before disappearing into the crowd. I slipped away to Dad's office, locking the door behind me. The envelope contained several items, a handwritten letter, a USB drive, copies of bank statements, and what appeared to be medical notes. My hands trembled as I unfolded Dad's letter, recognizing his precise handwriting, slightly shakier than normal. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then Elaine has fulfilled her promise, and I am gone. There are things I couldn't say while I was alive, partly because I lacked proof, and partly because I couldn't bear to shatter the image you have of your brother. But you deserve the truth, and I fear that without it, Michael will continue his deception. 3 months ago, I began to suspect Michael was tampering with my medication. The symptoms I experienced didn't align with my cancer progression. Dr. Reeves confirmed this privately, and we began keeping a separate chart. You'll find copies enclosed. More disturbing is what I discovered about the family finances. Michael has been siphoning money from my accounts for years, small amounts at first, then larger sums as my illness progressed. The bank statements show transfers to shell companies I've never heard of. The total now exceeds $300,000. Most alarming was the day you were called away to deal with the plumbing emergency at your apartment. I'm now convinced Michael orchestrated that distraction. While you were gone, he brought in a notary I didn't recognize, and had me sign documents. I was heavily medicated that day, days where I signed papers are marked in red on my personal calendar. I've since learned he presented an altered version of my will to my attorney, Jeffrey. The legitimate will, the one I drafted with Jeffrey last year, is stored on the USB drive, along with video testimony I recorded with Elaine's help. I didn't confront Michael because I feared what he might do if cornered. Instead, I've gathered what evidence I could. It may not be enough for legal action, but it should give you clarity. I'm sorry to burden you with this, my darling girl. I had hoped Michael would change, that the boy I raised was still in there somewhere. Now I can only hope that you can protect yourself and my legacy from his greed. All my love, Dad. The room seemed to tilt as I processed his words. I plugged the USB drive into Dad's computer with shaking hands. It contained video files dated throughout the last months of his life. Dad's thin face filling the screen as he detailed his suspicions, along with scans of the original will, leaving the practice to his longtime veterinary partner, and dividing the remaining assets equally between Michael and me. I clicked through the bank statements next. Dad was meticulous with his finances, each questionable transaction highlighted and annotated in his handwriting. The pattern was unmistakable, withdrawals and transfers coinciding with his worst days, when he was barely conscious. The medical notes were perhaps the most chilling. Detailed observations from Dad himself, and occasionally Elaine, documenting unexpected symptoms after Michael's visits, increased disorientation, extreme fatigue, nausea beyond what his regular medication caused. Next to one entry, Dad had written asked M about white powder in coffee. He said it was sweetener. I don't take sweetener. A soft knock at the door jolted me back to the present. I hastily gathered the documents, shoving them back into the envelope. Sarah, what are you doing in there? Michael's voice, impatient and slightly slurred from the whiskey he'd been drinking. The lawyer's here to discuss the will. We need you in the living room. I closed my eyes, hearing Dad's voice in my head. You always were the strong one. Taking a deep breath, I tucked the envelope into my purse. Coming, I called, my voice steadier than I felt. In the reflection of Dad's old desktop monitor, I barely recognized myself. The grief in my eyes now hardened with something new. Resolve. I sat across from Diane Mercer in her book-lined office, the envelope from Dad spread open between us. Diane had been our family's attorney since before I was born, and one of Dad's closest friends. Her face had grown increasingly grave as she examined each document. She removed her reading glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. Sarah, these allegations are extremely serious. If true, we're looking at elder abuse, financial fraud, and possibly attempted murder. It's true, I said firmly. The shock that had numbed me at the funeral had crystallized into something harder over the past 3 days. Dad wouldn't lie about this. And I've reviewed the bank records myself. The transfers line up with Michael's visits. Diane nodded slowly. The problem is proving it. Your father's suspicions and these records are compelling, but not conclusive enough for criminal charges. The altered will, however, that we might be able to contest successfully. I don't just want the will overturned, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. I want Michael exposed for what he did to Dad. I want everyone to know. Diane studied me for a long moment. Revenge won't bring your father back, Sarah. This isn't about revenge, I insisted, though part of me recognized the lie. It's about justice, about consequences. Michael can't just get away with this. After leaving Diane's office with a tentative legal strategy, I drove to Lakeside Memorial Hospital. Dad had spent his final weeks in the oncology ward, where many of the staff had grown fond of him. I'd brought homemade cookies. Dad's recipe, hoping they might help open doors. I remember your brother, said Nurse Garcia, accepting a cookie with a sad smile. Not many family members request to administer medications themselves. We explained it wasn't protocol, but he was persistent. Did he ever succeed? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Not officially, but there were shifts when we were understaffed. She frowned. I did find him alone with your father's IV once. He said he was just adjusting the pillow, but something felt off. I should have reported it, but you have nothing to apologize for. I assured her. Would you be willing to make a statement about what you observed? It could be important. By week's end, I had statements from 3 nurses, access to Dad's complete medical records, showing discrepancies between his prescribed medications and his symptoms, and an appointment with a toxicologist to review the findings. I'd also connected with Dad's bank manager, who agreed to provide a formal record of all transactions on Dad's accounts for the past 5 years. Each night, I returned to Dad's house, still filled with his presence in every corner, and updated my growing case file. The dining room table became command central, covered with documents, timelines, and sticky notes. I slept little, fueled by a strange mix of grief and determination. Michael called daily, his messages growing increasingly impatient about settling the estate matters. I responded vaguely, buying time. Meanwhile, I carefully recorded every conversation, noting inconsistencies in his stories. On the 7th day, while sorting through Dad's desk for additional financial records, I found an old photo album. In it was a picture of Michael and me as children, grinning with gap-toothed smiles as Dad helped us build a treehouse. We looked so happy, so innocent. Tears blurred my vision. When had Michael changed? Was it gradual, or had there been a defining moment when greed overcame family loyalty? And what would Dad truly want me to do now? I'm trying to honor you, I whispered to the empty room. But sometimes I don't know where justice ends and vengeance begins. That night, I created 2 plans. Plan A was straightforward: present all evidence to the district attorney and let the legal system handle Michael. Clean by-the-book justice that would likely result in charges but might take years to resolve, with no guarantee of conviction. Plan B was riskier but potentially more effective: a carefully orchestrated confrontation where Michael would be forced to face his actions in front of those whose respect he craved. Public shame might hurt him more than any legal punishment. As I stared at both plans, I remembered something Dad often said: character is what you do when nobody's watching. Michael had failed that test, but now I faced my own character test. How far was I willing to go to make him pay? I chose a path that felt right, one that balanced the scales without compromising who I was. Dad wouldn't want me to become someone I wasn't in pursuit of justice. But he wouldn't want Michael to escape consequences either. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. I made one final call to Diane, confirming our strategy, then tried to sleep, knowing the coming days would require all my strength. What the hell is this? Michael slammed the cease and desist letter onto Dad's kitchen counter. His normally perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. I stood my ground on the opposite side of the island, maintaining the physical barrier between us. It's exactly what it looks like, I replied, keeping my voice steady. An official notice that I'm contesting the will and requesting all assets remain frozen pending investigation. Investigation? His laugh was ugly, nothing like the warm chuckle he used to charm Dad's friends. Into what, exactly? Our father died of cancer, Sarah. It happens. I know about the medication, Michael. I watched his face carefully. I know about the money transfers, and I know about the forged will. A flicker of something panic maybe crossed his features before he composed himself. You're grief-stricken and irrational. Making wild accusations won't bring Dad back. I have proof. This time the panic stayed. What proof? I simply stared at him, letting the silence stretch. Dad's tactic when negotiating with difficult clients. Never show your full hand too early, Sarbear. Michael's demeanor shifted suddenly, his voice softening. Look, I know this is hard for you. It's hard for me too. We're both hurting. He circled the island, reaching for my hand. Why don't we talk this through? Just the two of us, like old times. Whatever misunderstanding, don't touch me. I stepped back. And don't insult me by pretending you're grieving. I saw you at the funeral, Michael. You were laughing. His face hardened. You always were Dad's perfect little girl, weren't you? Following him around the clinic, hanging on his every word. Meanwhile, I was the one with actual vision for the future, ways to grow his wealth, expand the business. But he was too stubborn, too set in his small-town mentality. So that justified stealing from him, possibly hastening his death. I didn't. He caught himself. You have no idea what you're talking about. And no one will believe you. Town crazy, still living with Daddy at 32, inventing conspiracies to deal with her grief. The character assassination stung, though I'd anticipated it. We'll see who they believe. Diane Mercer has all the documentation, so does Detective Harrington at County. Michael went very still. You went to the police yesterday. A partial lie. I had an appointment tomorrow, but Michael didn't need to know that. He snatched his keys from the counter. You'll regret this, Sarah. Family business should stay in the family. After he stormed out, I leaned against the counter, exhaling deeply. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as I'd expected, right down to Michael's attempt at manipulation before resorting to threats. What I hadn't expected was the text message that arrived an hour later from Aunt Vivian. Michael just called. He's worried about you, says you're having some kind of breakdown. Should we be concerned? By evening my phone was buzzing with messages from extended family and family friends, all variations on the same theme. Michael was worried about my mental state, how grief was affecting my judgment, how I'd always been high-strung. He's moving faster than I anticipated. I told Diane over the phone, pacing Dad's study. Classic Darvo, she replied. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. I've seen it countless times in domestic cases. He's trying to discredit you before you can expose him. It's working. Half the family thinks I'm having a psychotic break. Then we accelerate our timeline. Diane's voice was firm. I've been going through the financial records. It's worse than we thought, Sarah. The embezzlement goes back nearly 5 years, and it's not just your father's personal accounts. Michael's been skimming from the practice too. Dr. Westfield found discrepancies in the clinic's books. Dr. Westfield had been Dad's veterinary partner for over 20 years. The fact that he was independently discovering evidence felt like validation and ammunition. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Elaine, the hospice nurse, appeared at my door with another nurse I recognized from the oncology ward. "We've been talking," Elaine said, her expression determined. "There were other patients before your father, with similar situations. Wealthy patients with estranged family members, who suddenly became very involved near the end. We reported concerns, but nothing came of it. Your father's case, it fits a pattern we've been worried about." The realization that my father might not have been Michael's first victim made my blood run cold. That evening, I returned from meeting with Detective Harrington to find the house had been broken into. My files were untouched. I'd moved them to a safe location days ago, but Dad's computer was missing, along with the family safe containing his personal documents. As I was filing the police report, Aunt Vivian called. "Sarah, honey, I don't know what's going on between you and Michael, but this needs to stop. Your father wouldn't want his children at war." "You're right," I said, surprising her. "Dad wanted peace and honesty. That's exactly what I'm fighting for." "Michael says you're accusing him of terrible things. He's devastated." "Is he?" I kept my voice gentle. "Ask yourself this, Vivian. Did Michael visit Dad in the hospital? Even once in the final month?" Her silence was telling. "I know it's easier to think I'm just being emotional," I continued. "Easier than believing someone in our family could do something so terrible. But I need you to trust me, or at least reserve judgment until you've heard everything." After we hung up, I stared at the empty space where Dad's computer had been. Michael was getting desperate, destroying evidence, but his actions were only confirming his guilt. I touched the locket around my neck. Dad's last Christmas gift to me, containing a tiny photo of the two of us. "I won't let him win," I whispered. "I promise." The next morning, I received an email from Dad's bank. Michael had attempted to access Dad's safety deposit box using a power of attorney document dated after Dad had become incapacitated. The bank, already alerted by my legal team, had denied access and preserved the document as evidence of attempted fraud. Michael's mistakes were mounting, each one strengthening my case. But so was his desperation, and I couldn't help but wonder how far he might go to silence me. Dad's living room felt smaller with 20 family members and close friends crowded inside. The pretext, a memorial gathering to share memories of Dad before his personal effects were distributed, had drawn everyone including Michael, who stood by the fireplace nursing a scotch, occasionally glancing at his watch. Diane sat beside me on the sofa, a laptop discreetly positioned on the coffee table. Detective Harrington had stationed himself near the door, dressed in civilian clothes, indistinguishable from any other family friend. Dr. Westfield, Dad's veterinary partner, had arrived early to help set up, his presence bolstering my courage. Aunt Vivian approached, concern etched on her face. "Sarah, are you sure about this? There must be a less public way to resolve whatever's happening between you two." "This isn't about public shaming, Vivian," I said quietly. "It's about truth. I've tried handling this privately. Michael left me no choice." As the clock struck 2, I stood thanking everyone for coming. "Before we share memories, there's something important Dad wanted you all to hear." Michael straightened, his knuckles whitening around his glass. "Actually," he interjected, "before we start, I need to address something difficult." His voice carried the practiced concern of someone delivering bad news. "Many of you have noticed Sarah's behavior since Dad's passing. The accusations, the paranoia," murmurs rippled through the room. Michael continued. "I've consulted with Dr. Freeman about grief-induced psychosis." "Is Dr. Freeman here?" I interrupted, my voice steady. Michael faltered. "Well, no, but that's because Dr. Freeman doesn't exist," I said. "Just like the grief counselor Michael claimed to arrange for me doesn't exist. Just like the hospice care he told you all he was personally overseeing doesn't match the hospice records." I nodded to Diane, who opened the laptop. "My father recorded this 3 weeks before he died. He asked that I share it if necessary." Dad's gaunt face filled the screen. Despite his illness, his eyes remained sharp, focused. "If you're watching this," he began, "then my suspicions were correct, and Michael has attempted to alter my will and possibly worse." A collective gasp filled the room. Michael lunged forward. "This is obviously fake. She's manipulated, Michael." Dr. Westfield's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "I was there when he recorded this. Let him speak." On screen, Dad detailed everything: the unauthorized transfers from his accounts, the days when he felt strangely worse after Michael's visits, the pressure to sign documents while heavily medicated. "I've been a veterinarian for 40 years, Dad said. "I know what it looks like when something's been poisoned." Tears streamed down Aunt Vivian's face. Uncle Robert shook his head in disbelief. Michael's girlfriend stared at him, as if seeing a stranger. "This is slander," Michael hissed, but his confidence was crumbling. He was delusional from the medication. Elaine, the hospice nurse, stood. "Your father's mental faculties were intact until very near the end, Mr. Collins. His cognitive assessments confirm it." I placed Dad's medical records on the coffee table. "These show unexplainable spikes in certain compounds in Dad's blood work, spikes that coincide with your visits, Michael. You can't prove I had anything to do with that." "No," said Detective Harrington, stepping forward and revealing his badge. "But the search warrant for your apartment, executed this morning, turned up quite the collection of medications not prescribed to you. The lab is analyzing them now." Michael's face drained of color. "And the financial records," I continued, "show transfers totaling over $450,000 from Dad's accounts to shell companies registered under your name. Dr. Westfield has found similar discrepancies in the practice's books. It was my inheritance anyway." Michael snapped, his facade finally cracking. "All I did was take it early." The room went silent. In those 9 words he had confessed. "Your inheritance?" I echoed, my voice breaking for the first time. "Dad was still alive, fighting for every day while you were, what? Calculating the quickest way to get his money? You don't understand." Michael's voice rose. "I had debts, opportunities that needed capital. Dad never understood business. He was going to die anyway. I just needed it to happen on my timeline." Someone gasped. Michael seemed to realize what he'd admitted and backpedaled. "That's not, I didn't mean." "You laughed at his funeral," I said, my voice barely audible. "Our father was being lowered into the ground, and you laughed. Because it was finally over." Michael exploded. "Do you know what it's like being compared to Saint Sarah for 30 years? Perfect daughter, following in his footsteps, while I was never good enough." "Never. He loved you," I whispered. "He defended you until the end. Even when he suspected what you were doing, he kept making excuses for you. He controlled me, controlled the money that should have been mine. It was his money, Michael, his life. A life he wasted in this backwater town, fixing farm animals when he could have been somebody." Michael hurled his glass into the fireplace, shattering it. "I deserved more." Detective Harrington stepped forward. "Michael Collins, you need to come with me. We have questions regarding financial fraud and elder abuse. Depending on the toxicology results, there may be additional charges." "This is ridiculous." Michael looked around the room, searching for allies and finding none. "You're all believing her over me. After everything I've done for this family?" The silence was damning. As Detective Harrington led Michael toward the door, Michael paused beside me. "You think you've won?" he whispered, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Even if I go down, you'll never be sure exactly what I did to him. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved him if you'd figured it out sooner." The cruelty of his words stole my breath. Before I could respond, Dr. Westfield stepped between us. "That's enough, Michael," he said firmly. "You've done enough damage." After Michael and the detective left, the room remained silent for a long moment. Aunt Vivian approached me with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry I doubted you," she whispered, pulling me into an embrace. "Your father would be so proud of your strength." As the gathering dispersed, stunned family members leaving in ones and twos, I remained seated in Dad's chair, emotionally drained yet somehow lighter. The truth had finally come to light. Dad would have justice. But Michael's parting words echoed in my mind. A poison of their own. Would I ever stop wondering if I could have done more? 3 months after the confrontation in Dad's living room, I sat in the county courthouse as the judge delivered Michael's sentence. The toxicology results had been conclusive. Traces of medications that accelerated Dad's decline were found in samples of his hair, preserved as part of his medical record. Not enough to kill him outright, but enough to weaken him faster than the cancer alone would have. Michael had accepted a plea deal: 15 years for elder abuse, financial fraud, and reckless endangerment. He avoided the attempted murder charge, but he wouldn't be free until he was well into his 50s. He didn't look at me once during the hearing, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Outside the courthouse, Diane squeezed my shoulder. "It's finally over, was it? The legal battle, yes. The restoration of Dad's true will had been straightforward after Michael's confession. The veterinary practice went to Dr. Westfield as Dad intended, with provisions for the long-time staff. The house and half the remaining assets came to me, with the other half divided among charities Dad had supported. But the hole in my family couldn't be filled with legal victories. I had lost not only my father but also the brother I thought I had. There were moments walking past the old framed photo of Michael teaching me to ride a bike, finding his childhood drawings in Dad's desk, when grief for that lost relationship hit me as powerfully as grief for Dad. "What are your plans now?" Diane asked as we walked to our cars. "I'm selling the house," I said. "Too many ghosts." I didn't tell her about the nights I woke in a cold sweat, hearing Michael's final taunt. "You'll never be sure exactly what I did to him. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved him. Some wounds would take longer to heal than others." 1 week later, I stood in the empty hallway of Dad's house, my house, for the last time. The furniture had been donated, the personal items packed away. Only one task remained. In the backyard, beneath the old oak tree where Dad had built us a swing set decades ago, I knelt with a small garden trowel. The earth was soft from recent rain as I dug a modest hole and placed a sealed container inside. It contained the envelope Elaine had given me, along with the evidence that had convicted Michael. I didn't need to keep these reminders of betrayal. Dad wouldn't have wanted that burden for me. I did what I had to do. I told the oak tree, imagining Dad could hear me through its ancient roots, "But I don't want revenge to define me." As I covered the container with soil, I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but a determination not to let Michael steal anything more from me, including my capacity for joy. 6 months later, I stood before a small crowd gathered at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the William Collins Memorial Veterinary Clinic. I'd used my portion of Dad's estate to establish a nonprofit veterinary service for low-income families, housed in a bright building with windows that flooded the examination rooms with sunlight. "My father believed that compassion wasn't just a feeling but an action," I said, addressing the assembled community members and reporters. "He lived that belief every day, treating animals regardless of their owner's ability to pay. Today we ensure that legacy continues." Dr. Westfield smiled approvingly from the front row. Beside him sat Aunt Vivian and several of Dad's old friends. Even Elaine had come, now employed as the clinic's administrative director. As I cut the ribbon, applause erupted around me. For the first time since before Dad's illness, I felt something like peace. Not the absence of pain. I would always carry that, but the presence of purpose. Later that evening, I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset with Dad's old medical bag beside me. I'd kept it as my one tangible reminder of him. Inside was a note I'd found after his death, tucked into a dog-eared copy of his favorite veterinary text. "Remember, Bear, healing is always possible, even when cure is not." He'd written it about his patients, but somehow it seemed meant for me now. I couldn't cure what had happened, couldn't bring Dad back or reclaim the brother I'd lost, but perhaps in time, I could heal. The laughter of children playing in the park across the street filtered up to my balcony, life continuing, resilient and persistent. I touched the locket around my neck, Dad's final gift, and made a silent promise to focus on building rather than breaking, on healing rather than hurting. Some betrayals can never be forgiven, but I was learning that moving forward didn't require forgiveness, only the courage to stop looking back.